My selfish husband broke my trust by secretly giving his parents access to our joint business account, and they stole $50,000 to enjoy themselves. Their next plan was even more shocking, which I discovered when I read their secret conversations. The very next day, I took a bold step that metaphorically buried them alive. I've always believed in hard work and independence. From the time I was a little girl, growing up in Chicago, I knew I wanted to create something of my own. My grandmother, a seamstress, was my biggest inspiration. I used to sit by her side, watching her work tirelessly on her sewing machine, creating beautiful pieces from scraps of fabric. She used to tell me, "Anna, if you put your heart into something, you can create magic." Those words stuck with me, shaping who I became. Fast forward to my early 20s, I had just graduated with a degree in business, and I decided to follow in my grandmother's footsteps, not as a seamstress, but as a fashion entrepreneur. With a small loan and a lot of determination, I opened my boutique, Taylor's Threads, in the heart of Chicago. It wasn't much at first, a tiny space with a single display window, but I poured my soul into it. Slowly, word spread about my custom-made clothing and unique designs, and within a few years, my boutique became one of the most sought-after places for high-end, personalized fashion. By my late 30s, I had achieved what many people only dream of. Taylor's Threads was a thriving business with wealthy clients who appreciated the artistry and dedication behind every piece. I was proud of what I'd built. My life was full, busy, but fulfilling. The one thing I didn't have was someone to share it all with. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't unhappy being single. But sometimes, after a long day at work, I'd sit in my apartment, look at the city lights, and wonder if there was someone out there who'd understand me and my drive. That's when Ethan came into my life. We met at an art gallery opening, of all places. I remember how he introduced himself, confident but not arrogant, with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. He was in his mid-40s, a financial consultant with a sharp sense of humor and an easygoing charm. Over the next few months, we got to know each other. Ethan seemed to admire my independence and my work ethic. He'd say things like, "I've never met someone as passionate and focused as you, Anna." It's inspiring. Hearing that felt like validation of everything I'd worked so hard for. We dated for about a year before he proposed. I was hesitant at first, not because I didn't love him, but because my business had always been my priority. Could I balance both? Ethan assured me he understood. "I'd never want to come between you and your dreams," he said. "I just want to be part of your life." It sounded perfect, didn't it? So I said yes. Our wedding was simple but beautiful, a small ceremony with close friends and family. That's when I met his parents, Helen and Frank. At first glance, they seemed like a sweet, retired couple. Helen was a retired school administrator, and Frank had worked as a mechanic before retiring early. They were warm and welcoming, doting on Ethan and eager to include me in their family. I didn't see the cracks back then, the subtle hints of control and entitlement. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. The first few months of married life were wonderful. Ethan moved into my apartment and we started sharing responsibilities. But things started to change when Helen and Frank began showing up unannounced. At first, it was just occasional visits, Helen bringing over a pie or Frank asking for advice on his car. But soon, it became a regular thing. Helen started offering suggestions for my boutique, most of which were out of touch with my brand. "You know, Anna," she'd say, "you should consider making more affordable pieces. Not everyone can afford those fancy dresses." I brushed it off as well-meaning advice, even when she started inviting her friends to the boutique and demanding discounts. I thought I was being kind, accommodating. What I didn't realize was that I was being taken advantage of. The first major red flag came about 6 months into our marriage. I'd been saving up to expand the boutique, maybe even open a second location. One day, while checking our joint account, I noticed a large withdrawal, $20,000. My heart sank. I immediately called Ethan. "Ethan," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "why is there $20,000 missing from our account?" There was a pause before he answered. "Oh, that," he said, sounding almost casual. "Mom and Dad were in a bit of a bind. They needed help paying off some debts, so I figured it was okay to use some of the money. It's our family, Anna. We help each other. I was stunned. That money was meant for the boutique. When I told him this, he looked genuinely apologetic. I'm sorry, Anna. I should have talked to you first. It won't happen again. I promise. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think it was just a mistake, a one-time thing. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. I told myself I was overthinking it, that Ethan loved me and wouldn't hurt me intentionally. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. But at that moment, I chose to trust him. After all, marriage is about trust, isn't it? I didn't realize how much trust could be broken. The thing about trust is that once it's shaken, it's hard to regain. After the $20,000 incident, I tried to move on, convincing myself that Ethan's mistake was a lapse in judgment and not a sign of something deeper. I buried myself in my work, expanding Taylor's threads and working on new designs for the upcoming fall collection. But it didn't take long for more cracks to appear. Helen's visits to the boutique became more frequent. She'd show up unannounced, offering her advice on how to run my business. Anna, she'd say in that tone that made it sound like she was doing me a favor, you should try offering group discounts. My bridge club would love that. Or, why don't you host a fashion show for the neighborhood? It could be a great way to connect with the community. At first, I politely declined, but Helen was persistent. She started inviting her friends to the boutique without asking me, promising them discounts or free alterations. I felt trapped. How do you say no to your mother-in-law without creating tension? I thought I was being gracious, but in hindsight, I was being walked all over. Then came the family fashion show. Helen proposed the idea casually one afternoon while we were having coffee. Anna, she said, I was thinking, why not host a fashion show at the boutique? We can invite some family and friends, and it'll be a fun way to showcase your work. I hesitated. Hosting an event like that would take time and resources, and it wasn't part of my business strategy. But Helen pressed on. It'll be good for the boutique, she said. And it's family. What's more important than that? Ethan chimed in, siding with his mother. It could be fun, Anna. And Mom's right, it might bring in more clients. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a harmless gesture. But when the day of the fashion show arrived, it was a disaster. Helen had invited over 50 people, most of them her friends, and they treated the boutique like a discount warehouse. They tried on clothes without asking, ignored the rules about handling custom pieces, and demanded family discounts on everything. I was mortified. The final straw that day was when Helen loudly announced, "Isn't Anna lucky to have a family like us to support hers?" I could barely keep the smile on my face as I watched her friends leave with armfuls of clothes, many of which were sold at prices that barely covered my costs. That night, I confronted Ethan. Ethan, this has to stop. Your parents are interfering with my business. Helen is treating the boutique like her personal playground. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Anna, they're just trying to help. They don't mean any harm. Helps. I snapped. They're costing me money, Ethan. This isn't just about feelings, it's about my livelihood. He looked at me with those pleading eyes, the ones that made me feel guilty for even bringing it up. I'll talk to them, he said. I'll make sure they back off. But he didn't. Things only got worse. A few weeks after the fashion show, I noticed something strange when I logged into my boutique's business account. There was a withdrawal of $50,000, a staggering amount that I hadn't authorized. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the transactions, trying to make sense of it. That money was meant for payroll and inventory. Without it, the boutique could be in serious trouble. I called Ethan immediately. Ethan, I said, my voice shaking, did you take $50,000 from the business account? There was a long pause before he answered. Anna, it wasn't just me. Mom and Dad needed it. They were planning a trip to Europe and… Stop. I cut him off, my voice trembling with anger. You gave them access to my business account? Ethan, do you even realize what you've done? That money wasn't for vacations. It was for the boutique. Anna, calm down, he said, as if my anger was unreasonable. It's just money. We can make it back. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's not just money, Ethan. It's my hard work, my business. And you gave them access without even asking me? He tried to defend himself, saying it was family helping family again, but I couldn't listen. I hung up and spent the rest of the night trying to figure out how to cover the boutique's expenses. The next day, I confronted Helen. Why did you think it was okay to take $50,000 from my business account? I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. Helen didn't even flinch. Oh, Anna, don't be so dramatic, she said. Ethan said it was fine. And besides, you're doing so well. What's a little bit of money? We're family after all. Her casual dismissal of my hard work was like a slap in the face. But the worst was yet to come. A week later, I stumbled upon an email exchange between Helen and Ethan. My stomach turned as I read the messages. Helen had convinced Ethan to marry me, not because he loved me, but because she saw my boutique as a goldmine for their family. She referred to me as the jackpot and discussed ways they could benefit from my success. I sat there in shock, the words blurring on the screen. The man I thought loved me had been complicit in his parents' schemes all along. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. My marriage wasn't built on love, it was built on manipulation. I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. But I also knew I had to be smart about it. They had underestimated me, thinking I was too trusting, too naive. They were wrong. When you find out the people closest to you have betrayed you, it's like the ground beneath your feet vanishes. That's how I felt after reading those emails. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about everything, my trust, my marriage, my dignity. Ethan and his parents had been manipulating me from the start, seeing me as nothing more than a way to fund their lifestyle. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I sat there, staring at my laptop, my mind racing. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The first thing I did was secure my business. I went to my bank the very next morning and removed Ethan's name from all the accounts. I froze every joint credit card and set up new passwords for all my accounts. It felt like I was reclaiming something they had stolen from me, control. Then I hired a lawyer. I explained everything, the unauthorized withdrawals, the emails, and even Helen's blatant interference in my business. My lawyer was sharp, and her eyes narrowed as I laid out the details. We have a case, she said firmly. But you'll need evidence to back all this up. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. If Helen and Frank had been this bold with me, I wondered what other schemes they'd been involved in. I needed to know everything. The investigator worked quickly. Within weeks, he uncovered a web of deceit. Helen and Frank had been living far beyond their means for years. They had maxed out credit cards, taken out loans they couldn't repay, and even falsified documents to cover their tracks. They'd done it all under the guise of being a sweet, retired couple, relying on people like me to foot the bill. I also discovered that Helen had been bad-mouthing me to Ethan behind my back, calling me cold and selfish whenever I tried to set boundaries. She'd manipulated him into thinking he was doing the right thing by siding with her. And Ethan? He'd let her. He'd let her destroy the trust in our marriage because he was too weak to stand up to her. But what hurt the most was realizing how long this had been going on. Helen had convinced Ethan to marry me not because he loved me, but because she saw my boutique as a gold mine. I was nothing more than a means to an end for them. I decided to confront them all at once. I didn't want this to drag on. I wanted it over. So, I invited Ethan, Helen, and Frank to the boutique after hours, saying I had something important to discuss. When they arrived, Helen was all smiles, acting like she owned the place. Anna, darling, what's all this about? She asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I didn't waste time. I handed them copies of the emails, the bank statements, and the investigator's report. This is what it's about, I said, my voice steady. Ethan's face paled as he scanned the documents. Helen, however, barely blinked. Anna, you're overreacting, she said, waving the papers dismissively. We're family. Families share things. Family? I said, my voice rising. You've lied to me, stolen from me, and treated my business like your personal ATM. You don't get to call this family. Frank tried to jump in. Now hold on, Anna. Let's not make this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is? I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. You drained $50,000 from my business account. You manipulated Ethan into marrying me for my money. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's fraud. Ethan looked at me, his eyes pleading. Anna, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I love you. I laughed bitterly. Love? Is that what you call this? Love doesn't scheme. Love doesn't lie. You chose them over me every single time. Helen's sweet facade cracked then. You're blowing this out of proportion, she snapped. We did what we had to do. And you're not exactly innocent, you let us in. Don't act like you didn't benefit from having us around. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. Benefit? All you've done is take. But that ends today. I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been holding on to. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm pressing charges. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and I have all the evidence I need. You're going to pay back every penny you stole. The room fell silent. For the first time, Helen looked nervous. Frank shifted uncomfortably, and Ethan just stood there, his head hanging. Helen tried one last time. Anna, be reasonable. Think about what this will do to Ethan. I am thinking about Ethan, I said coldly. And this is the best thing I can do for him. Cut him loose. I walked out of the boutique, leaving them behind to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I wasn't done yet, there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control. I walked out of my boutique that night feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I knew the battle wasn't over yet. Confronting Ethan, Helen, and Frank was just the beginning. There were legal matters to settle, financial messes to clean up, and my life to rebuild. The very next day, I met with my lawyer to finalize the divorce papers and file charges for financial fraud. The evidence I had collected was overwhelming: emails, bank statements, the investigator's report. My lawyer assured me we had a strong case. They won't be able to talk their way out of this, she said with confidence. Of course, Helen didn't go down quietly. She tried everything to manipulate the situation. She left me countless voicemails, switching between apologies and veiled threats. Anna, think about what you're doing, one message said. Do you really want to ruin Ethan's life? And what about us? We're family. But I didn't respond. I was done being her pawn. Ethan, on the other hand, showed up at my apartment one evening, looking disheveled and desperate. Anna, please, he said as I opened the door. Can we talk? I made a mistake. I let my parents get in the way, but I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I looked at him, trying to see the man I had fallen in love with, but all I could see was someone who had betrayed me. Ethan, I said, my voice calm but firm, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, over and over again. You chose them over me, over our marriage. And now you have to live with the consequences. He pleaded with me for what felt like hours, but my decision was final. I handed him the divorce papers and told him to leave. Over the next few months, the legal process played out. Helen and Frank tried to downplay their actions, claiming they didn't know what they were doing was wrong. But the evidence spoke for itself. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. They were ordered to repay the money they had stolen, and while it wouldn't happen overnight, knowing they were being held accountable was enough for me. Ethan didn't contest the divorce. I think, deep down, he knew there was no salvaging what we had. I made sure to cut all ties, blocking his number, and ensuring he had no access to my accounts or my life. With the legal matters behind me, I turned my focus back to Taylor's threads. My boutique had suffered during the chaos, but I was determined to bring it back stronger than ever. I introduced a new line of sustainable fashion, inspired by my grandmother's philosophy of creating beauty from simplicity. The response was incredible. My loyal clients returned, and new ones came flocking in. But it wasn't just about the boutique. I was rediscovering myself, the person I had been before Ethan and his family entered my life. I found joy in the little things again, experimenting with new designs, spending quiet evenings with a good book, and even taking long walks along the Chicago River. One evening, as I was scrolling through glowing reviews of my new collection, I got a call from my lawyer. Anna, she said, I thought you'd like to know that Helen and Frank's accounts have been frozen due to unpaid debts. They're officially bankrupt. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just relief. They could no longer manipulate anyone else the way they had manipulated me. The final chapter of this ordeal came a few months later. I had been invited to speak at a fashion event in New York, sharing my journey as a boutique owner. After the event, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe, reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the woman I had been when I met Ethan, driven, independent, but maybe a little too trusting. And I thought about the woman I had become, stronger, wiser, and unapologetically myself. It wasn't an easy journey. There were moments when I felt broken, moments when I doubted myself. But in the end, I realized that their betrayal didn't define me. My response to it did. When I returned to Chicago, I felt ready to close this chapter of my life for good. I decided to hold a celebration at the boutique, a small gathering of friends, clients, and colleagues who had supported me through everything. As I stood there that evening, looking around at the people who genuinely cared for me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Ethan or his parents. I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had gained: freedom, strength, and the knowledge that I could overcome anything. Before the night ended, one of my oldest clients approached me. Anna, she said with a smile, you've been through so much, but look at you now. You're an inspiration. I smiled back, feeling the truth in her words. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger than ever. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Not Anna, the wife or the victim, but Anna Taylor, the woman who built a life and business on her own terms. This was my story, and I was finally free to write the next chapter.